Hi, I'm Susan from World Peaceful, and I'm going to read about Susan Lindauer today, who's a former CIA asset and whistleblower. Now, this transcript I'm going to read from is published and it'll be attached to this video so that you can go through it in more detail. It's actually entitled on her video, Whistleblower Susan Lindauer Exposes Everything. So it's about 9/11. She's got a book out called Extreme Prejudice. She's gone through quite an ordeal in her own awakening. Whistleblowers are basically people who are awakening. They have believed what has been said to them. They've believed in what they're doing. They've believed that they're serving their country. They've believed in their government. And typically the whistleblowers are the ones who realise that what they believed was untrue. And they're people of conscience, by and large, if not all of them, because they're risking their lives. You can always tell the ones who are genuine whistleblowers because they are putting their lives on the line, and there's nothing for them that comes out of this. There's no money, nothing. They become targeted. And what's really interesting, in many of the whistleblower stories I've had the privilege of hearing, is they come out stronger in actual fact. Most people won't blow the whistle because they're frightened of the vilification, they're frightened of being dragged through courts, they're frightened of jail, they're frightened of being attacked or beaten up or murdered. And this is, of course, bullying. That is a deliberate tactic in order to keep people silent. Legislation is another tactic, using the law in order to silence dissent. Now, that only becomes a problem when one of two scenarios is the way I'd probably put it. One could be it is a genuine revealing of secrets that can endanger lives. So there is that possibility sitting there on the one hand. On the other hand, it's those in positions of power hiding crimes. They don't want those crimes to come out. They are seeking to silence that person quite deliberately, and the word desperately came to me. They're quite desperate to get it silenced because they're frightened themselves. They know what they've done and they will do anything to shut that person down. And that, the word selfish comes to my mind too, in that they have to be the most selfish people, in that they're quite willing to destroy the life of someone who's innocent in order to save their own. Dog-eat-dog world, rather than a sense of duty, a sense of self-respect, where you've been caught, and a person who has dignity would actually admit what they've done. Yeah, I'm just getting the words fall on your sword. And what that's really saying is, that's certainly not implying suicide or anything like that, but it's a metaphoric statement of you have to take the fall. A courageous person admits their mistake. A coward puts others in front. Another sort of line of phrase that's going through my mind is that boys take and men give. So immature men, they will seek to dodge the bullet, so to speak. It's funny how all these terminologies are coming up, and I'm a peacemaker. It's probably because of what I'm about to read is about, crime. And really, the purpose of doing this video is really because of the civilians that are being targeted. 9/11 is a massive targeting, but there will be other targetings around the world. The public in Syria, the public in Iraq, the public in Afghanistan, the Balkans, various other countries where conflicts have been orchestrated. The public are the ones that get targeted. And, the confusion in all these lines is that there has been such a promotion around the military. There's a huge narrative around the military, and the military people themselves are very strongly indoctrinated into this mentality. Now, I will call it, to a certain degree, a cult type mentality, and please forgive me if those who are listening to this take offence. I mean it in the sense that wherever you have groups that are to obey without question, they are to listen to that mantra, they are not to criticise it, they're not to publicly denigrate it, otherwise they get shamed, blamed, excommunicated, punished on some level for stepping out of line. So I mean it in the context of when we have situations where people are obeying without question. Now, the whistleblowers come out because they're not obeying without question. They're actually questioning everything because they feel something's wrong. So this woman I'm going to talk about today, and I don't know how easily it's going to be for me to keep this short. I'll do my best, but it's so long. And to be quite honest, when I looked over, I was thinking, how do I cut this down? She already has narrated this that I'm about to read excerpts from in a video. This is the transcript. And it's actually dated the 23rd of September 2011. That was really yesterday. Today's the 24th here in Australia. So yesterday was the 23rd. And that was back in 2011. We're 2019, so this is 8 years ago. This is 18 years after September 11 actually happened. But slowly the truth is coming out. But doesn't it take a long time? Anyway, just to give you a bit of a rundown on her, I'll also, just to add this in, I'll also provide the video presentation link which this is taken from, so you can actually see her talking. So she says that she was born on July 17, 1963. So she's a couple of years older than me, so she'd be 56. In her video, she looks a lot younger, in actual fact. So she was born to John Lindauer, newspaper publisher, Alaska governor, Republican nominee. Her dad was an economist, former chancellor of the University of Alaska, Anchorage. So she's come from a well-off background. Dad's got economics, and he's also in the media, which is an interesting combination. In 1985, she attended Smith College in political science. 1986, London School of Economics. 1987 to 1988, Seattle Post Intelligencer reporter. So she's reported on the intelligence community in Seattle. 1989, the Everett Herald editor-writer. So I'd say that her father got her some work there in the media. So she worked as a journalist. 1990 to 1992, US News and World Report. She was a reporter and a researcher. 1993, Republican Peter DeFazio, Democrat, Oregon, I'm guessing, OR, staffer. She was a staffer. 1994, Republican Ron Wyden, she was a staffer. 1995, Libyan UN mission US liaison. I'd say she was in New York. CIA covert asset. 1996, Senator Carew Moseley Braun, and she was a CIA covert asset press secretary. This is Susan. 1996, same year, Iraq UN mission, US liaison, New York, CIA covert asset. 2002, Republican Zoe Lofgren, CIA covert asset. She was the press secretary. I had a question when I was reading this before, who got her into the CIA? I guess when she worked for the Republicans, I'm assuming that is, or House of Representative. Congress. I don't know if REP means representative or Republican. I'm assuming it's Republican. I'm not sure. Don't quite know the acronyms here. So in 2004, she was arrested and charged as a spy for Iraqi intelligence, largely on psychiatrist Stuart Kleinman, testimony of mental disorder and grandiose delusions. Only second non-Arab American prosecuted by the Patriot Act. By Southern District of New York, Judge Michael B. Mukasey, Mukasey, later appointed Attorney General, November 9, 2007. He'd be worth looking at, which side of the fence he's on and who he's associating with. Because as we learn, I don't know if I'll get to the bit talking a lot about her psychiatric diagnosis. She's got no psychiatric problem. She came close to a lobotomy, and another judge, let her off. I just want to sit with that for a moment. So judges in high places is coming to me in the sense of protecting others. So there's links, political links. So the judiciary is not separate from the political area, which it should be in a democratic society. Also, another issue, very, very important, is the use of psychiatric terminology. I've been in the experience where it's been alluded that when I wanted to end my life in a situation where I was under duress, that I had a psychiatric problem, which I didn't. And that was deliberately used in order to discredit. So I have some resonance with Susan there, in that I believe they actually use the mental health card as a means of discrediting a person's testimony. And this is a further subversion of justice, because the truth is being smeared, is the correct word. So 2006, US District Judge Michael B. Mukasey hearing on government request to forcibly drug Lindauer while incarcerated. So the government was requesting her to be drugged. Actually, it seems like the same judge here. So moving on to 2006, same year, but this is September that year. So this happened in May, where the government was requesting to forcibly drug her. That's very dangerous. I think this was the chemical lobotomy she's talking about. Same judge released Lindauer as unfit to stand trial for mental illness. Case reassigned to Judge Loretta Preska. It may well be that judge, so in this case, so you can't judge people, you've got to hear all of the evidence, don't you? He may well have been uncomfortable with that and said she was unfit to stand trial, so she couldn't be put in a position where that could happen. That looks to me, just on the surface of things, that he may well have helped her. So I take it back. He may be okay. I hope so. So she was reassigned to Judge Loretta Preska. It's hard to say because it depends on, you have to sit in the court and hear the attorneys. You know, what's the attorney saying? Did that force that judge's hand, or did that judge make a decision to be just? I hope for his sake he did. 2007, US District Judge Loretta Preska released Lindauer as mentally unfit to stand trial. 2008, blogger publicised Lindauer's illegal prosecution. 2009, government dropped Patriot Act lawsuit. This is a Patriot Act, is a worry. Here in Australia, we've got the ASIO Act. Came in around the same time because we follow the United States. We're very influenced by them. As Scott Ritter said, we're probably the 51st state. And at the time, he wasn't arguing that as a badge of honour. He was seeing it as shameful, particularly when we're looking into government behaviours And certainly a conspiracy is being raised here. As a fact, this is someone who's an insider. She worked with the Iraqis directly. She was the one who went between the US government and the Iraqis and the Libyans, sending messages, so she knew what was going on. So we're not just talking hearsay here in this woman's case, and that's probably why people are very frightened of her, because her testimonial is extremely credible, and she's very credible. She's a very friendly person, and I did see someone write that, oh, she smiles too much. And it's like, oh God, there's always a criticism. The poor girl went through 5 years of incarceration. She stood up for what she felt was true. I mean, can we look beyond whether she's smiling or not? She's probably really happy that she's free. Anyway, she published her book Extreme Prejudice in 2010. So, and from that date until now, she is a US government corruption critic. So she's a whistleblower about corruption. She's a journalist. So I'm just going to read some stuff and see how far I can go with this. It's a lot to read, so I'm going to be sort of hesitating as I go through this, because I know that it's going to be full on. Anyway, her host introduces her, and he talks about the 9/11 Truth Alliance, and I think I might read about that. So this 9/11 Truth Alliance is obviously an alliance of people who are coming together to actually speak the truth about 9/11, because it really, even the 9/11 Commission, various people who were attached to that have also come up and out with concerns about the validity of it. I met Scott Ritter, Senior Weapons Inspector in Iraq, and he, of course, is extremely critical of the US government in respect to the false intelligence leads in Iraq. And what he says very much in summary is that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The reality was it was name change, not regime change. So there was no moral ground whatsoever in respect of pursuing noble perspectives of democracy. No one was pursuing an idea of disarmament. They didn't care about that. We also are aware of Donald Rumsfeld negotiating with Saddam Hussein back in the 80s in respect of, allowing, he was talking about the chemical weapons, etc. So there's no moral ground here is really the essence. And I think what's upsetting for the public is they are entrusting these leaders to go out and defend the country. And of course, militarism is called defence. But we've now got preemptive strike type narratives, which means they can go out and preemptively do something in order to prevent something from happening to them. Whereas in the past, the defence posture was in defence of a circumstance happening like the Second World War. Hawaii, Pearl Harbor was bombed. That brought the United States into the war in a defensive capacity. So with the preemptive shift, that means activities can be happening to orchestrate wars. Now, in the case of Iraq, as was stated by Scott Ritter, it was name change. There was also deals being done with the Taliban down in, I believe, Texas. They had meetings. I think it was down there. I could be wrong there. But nonetheless, they did have meetings. And, we're talking an oil and gas industry here. This is what is the really big question behind all of this. And these endless wars on terror serve definitely the industrial military complex, because they can obviously make a lot of money out of this. And the contractors who can come in and rebuild these countries. But I would like to say at the beginning of this, what of the poor people? It's like the public. What respect is there for the public? What respect is there for people? So, if I step outside of my, incredible despair around the public being murdered, I mean, these terminologies of friendly fire, this is not appropriate terminology. It's like, how can you call it friendly fire? You've just destroyed people's lives. Actually, there is something I do need to say, and I'm just going to say it because it's been on my mind for a few days. And I may have to skim through this transcript because I know I'm communicating. I've already gone 20 minutes into this. But this is really a message to those who are destroying the lives of innocent people, the targeting of civilians. Now, whether they're in war zones or whether they're in democratic countries and you don't like them, the feeling I had to talk about was really to say, I'm just going still for a moment because I'm just getting the inner feeling. When you look through technology and you target, and I've seen this done in footage from the cockpit of a helicopter gunship, I've heard the communication in respect to the pilots seeking affirmative responses from those in control in order to target. In the case that I saw, there was a journalist, I think, with a camera on the ground, and it was perceived that he was carrying a gun. And there was permission granted to destroy the target. But the thing was, I remember seeing all the people around this person who was not carrying a gun, it was carrying a camera in actual fact. It got destroyed. I think there was a van as well. I know afterwards a van came, that's right, and then they got targeted. They were trying to, like this is Geneva Conventions, they were picking up wounded. They got targeted. So the rules of war went out the window. So the rules of engagement went out the window. So what we're talking about here is criminality in warfare. And this is going to be the subject for the next video as well, is where do you draw the line between combatants? Where do you draw the line with civilians? Now, I have to go back to the inner feeling because I'm being drawn there right now as to the human cost. I was just setting up the situation. Okay, the man who was targeted, who had the gun, there's someone in his life, group of people in his life that love him deeply. We look through the camera and we see an image and you don't see the body parts, you don't see blood, you're not on the ground, you're not witnessing it directly in front of you, which would create a human response of shock and horror unless you're extremely battle hardened, which majority of people are not. He has people around him, a family around him, and I want to go deep into this. He's gone. He felt nothing, was quick, and people can justify in their minds, oh, well, they don't feel anything, there's no wounds. Okay, I'm feeling moved to look at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, the various defence contractors who produce the weapons. They are enabling these situations to happen, and they are directly linked. The human beings inside these companies are directly linked to the person who's blown up on the ground. Now, I'm speaking now more in a metaphysical way and an energetic way. You are actually linked. It might seem remote because you are, in a sense, remote viewing through a video camera a scenario of how the weapon is used, and you can detach emotionally from that and dispassionately look at the object. This is the object of things. This is not the human state of being that's normal. You've been trained to look at the object. You're in a left brain technical mode where you are marveling at the power of the weapon. You're marveling at its trajectory, its speed, its targeting ability, its laser guided, and all the technical specifications that go around that weapon. You're marveling at that. But where you are not focused and you're trained out of this, and the neural network in your mind is also reprogrammed not to feel for the human being. And if you're in the military, which you probably would be, you have had a very strong training to detach from the emotional state, which is perceived as a weakness. If you weaken to feel something and you do something spontaneously, you let down the team. So you're taught very much to stand in the line, to not see the other as human, but to see them as an enemy, and on some level they deserved it. That's how you can cope as a human being engaged in an industry that's killing people. Not just people, you're killing wildlife, you're killing trees, you're polluting environments, you're sending out all sorts of radiation into these spaces, and you're calling it justified because you're in defense of something that you think is important. I'm just going to say it like it is as I see it. You're most welcome to critique me. I don't mind. I'm not in your shoes completely, but I'm just saying it like I'm feeling it. So these are the ones that are facilitating. This is the material facilitation of an act of violence. And it is a form of terrorism without a doubt, because you're creating terror on the ground. Terrorism is an act of terrorism, although they may state technically that they are not in official armies. They used to be called freedom fighters. They used to be called insurgents. I think they're still called insurgents. What else were they called? I'm just thinking mercenaries. Mercenaries brought in. There's a whole patter of language that goes around that. So I want to go back again into the vibration around the human being that got targeted falsely by a mistake, and the people around that person who nobody thinks about, like the mother of this man. I'm going to give him a name because I'm going to humanize him. His name's Tom. Could be Omar. Depends on where we are in the world. Let's call him Omar. So we won't make him Western. I'm going to create a story around Omar. Omar loves photography, and he's always done it. He's always done it from teenage years because he can really see the beauty in things. He too is looking through a lens in the world, trying to capture something of what he feels is beautiful. And he always marvels at when he creates these photos of his houses and the people, the laughter, the weddings. This is a joy in his life. Now, his life's journey has taken him to this point where he's amongst a group of people. He's unaware of a Black Hawk helicopter overhead, which is quite some distance away, observing. I'm just assuming telephoto lens. I'm just using whatever words come in. He's been observed. He's carrying this camera in his pocket, which looks like, from that distance, looks like a gun. He's laughing with the people he's with, their friends. He has stress, a lot of stress, in that he's living in a war zone. He's always worried about people around him that are going to be killed. He's seen a lot of death. He's got a lot of trauma happening within him. He's very, very frightened, but he's very angry as well. There's a huge anger sitting inside him because he's seen all those things that he loves being destroyed. And he too is seeing an enemy in the United States. He will be seeing that enemy as well, as they are looking upon him as an enemy. So as you look out upon the world mirrors back. So as a group come in and attack another group, the other group will look upon that other as a form of terrorists. They'll see them as committing war crimes. They will see them as the enemy. They might be heathen if they're Muslim. They might see them in that way. So depending on their cultural background, there'll be a lot of narrative around that. I'm going back to the mother. So this video is actually going to be an introduction, and I will go into a second video to talk about the transcript, because I'm feeling very strongly to stay with the humanizing of the targeted individual. I'm going to put it into another language, the murdered person. This person is a civilian being murdered by another person who's in a helicopter. And I'm using that language because this person I know in the scenario that I'm talking about was mistakenly killed. So they were an innocent civilian targeted in a urban conflict, non-military urban conflict, where military people are engaged in this urban area and they don't know who is who. Very much similar scenario to Vietnam. Getting the feeling of saying that similar scenario to Chechnya for the Russians. And the Russians were also in Afghanistan too, and they were targeting civilians, definitely. So going back to the mother, I'm going to call him Omar for no particular reason. I think Omar in Afghan means, I think it means hope. He was the hope of his mum. His mother sees someone coming to her door and she knows. She knew the moment he was killed that he was dead because of the cord between them is so strong, as is all mothers' cords with their children. They know. Women are incredibly intuitive, but they're energetically strong cords between them and their loved ones, and the fathers too. I feel to cry because I know the mother, she will be devastated on hearing the news that her beloved child is killed, and she'll want to know how he was killed. She'll really want to know, did he suffer? And she will feel weak as she falls to her knees. Someone will have to carry her. The grief will grip at her heart. She'll feel her heart being torn apart. Devastation, absolute devastation, shattering of her entire life. Her life is shattered. It's like someone has put a knife into her stomach when her child is killed. She will be desperate to touch him for a last time. She'll want to see him. There'll be no body because he was blown up into bits, and I want the industrial military complex to hear this. She can't even touch his body. She can't prepare his body. She can't witness him being buried, to say her goodbye to someone she adores. She knows his every mood, his personality. She knows every part of her son because she gave birth to him. She brought him into the world. Then you've got the brothers and the sisters, the uncles, the grandparents, all of them absolutely destroyed by one missile going into a group and blowing them all up. And of course, there's a lot of people around him that got killed as well, and their families are all going through the same thing. And this is the massive disconnect that has to happen in order to kill another. You cannot connect to the absolute devastation of the families because you're killing families. So he goes, he feels nothing, he's gone. The targeted individual is actually gone with that type of weaponry. He wouldn't have felt anything because I saw how powerful the weapons are. They're hugely powerful. Just pulling up my socks. Getting cool. There were witnesses that saw the attack, and that creates even more hatred towards the perpetrator. And that hatred, all it is a cry for help. It's a cry for help. They're in absolute pain. because they see an injustice in it. This person did nothing, they were innocent. Reverberates out too, it reverberates. It's like a collective consciousness too. So when you're shooting missiles into these spaces of public, there's a massive shift in the collective consciousness at the same time. Every time you murder people, you hurt people, you harm people. It's almost like, because there's a field of consciousness around the people. And so it shifts because we're all connected, you see. Energetically, we're all connected, including the ones who are shooting the missiles to the people on the ground. They're also energetically connected. And they won't forget. There'll be times when they wake up in the middle of the night and they remember. They may even have sweats because they know after the heat of battle is over and they have time to reflect and be alone, they will suffer very deeply about having caused the death of people that they can't take back, because you're in the heat of battle and that you're heavily indoctrinated, you're heavily trained in order to do this task. And you have to really believe it in order to do it. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. I'm also feeling very strongly to talk about the generations that won't be. So when you are killing children, you're killing women, you're killing men, there are generations that won't exist. You're actually destroying future generations. Had you not had a presence in that scenario, they would have lived on and had children, their children's children, and there would have been a million people connecting to that individual, sending out experiences, connections, adding to the collective consciousness. And that's something no one ever thinks about, is you kill one person, you're actually firstly destroying families, and that actually impacts their futures as well. You're actually impacting everyone's futures who's touched by the event. And on a collective consciousness, you're actually changing the future of that country. There's trauma being injected into that country, massive trauma. And just because the troops get pulled out doesn't mean it's all over and mission completed, accomplished, wasn't it? Mission accomplished. I don't know what the mission was. Well, I guess the mission was endless terror, wasn't it? Because we'll get to that when I talk about Susan Lindauer. But I'm just taking it into a deeper space because no one does it. So future generations are changed, they don't exist, the ones that would have come. The children who have witnessed all this trauma, they've witnessed all this violence, will also be carrying enormous pain bodies. You look at Eckhart Tolle's work on that, the pain body. So people are carrying these pain bodies, and it deeply affects their lives. They might be too frightened to go outside. The infrastructure is destroyed, so they can't go to school. One of the big issues that came out of Charlie Wilson's War, that film, was when Charlie Wilson was trying to get funding at the very end when they'd won the war and, the great bravado of being winners, and the Russians were marching out of Afghanistan. There was Charlie Wilson with a few representatives sitting at some tables at the end of the war, and he was trying to get money, just a little bit of funding for schools, because more than half the children were under 15, I think, maybe even under 20, but it was a lot of children that were orphaned. So the men in all of this, inclusive of the Russians, none of them took responsibility for impacting the future lives of all those people that remained. There was no backward glance or responsibility for the psychological trauma that was created by violence. There is no responsibility by the companies who are arming in respect of violence. No backward glance to the devastation of the human being. And I remember seeing a painting done by an Afghan artist, and it was the most extraordinary painting. It looked like ruins. It looked like a whole heap of ruins. And when you looked at the picture properly, you could see it was actually in the shape of there was a head, and there were arms on either side, and there was feet at the end. So it was sort of ruins in the shape of a man lying on his side, from a side perspective. Now, near that man, his city was ruins, he was ruins. The painting was depicting the ruining of the human being on every level. On the wall, there was a painting of a wall, and on the wall was a helmet, and in the helmet was a baby, and the baby was a product of war, and the baby was kind of in a very precarious situation on the wall, could tip either way. So the children are deeply traumatized. They're very vulnerable, and of course they're vulnerable to child trafficking. And of course I've heard some people talking about the pedophilia in Afghanistan. Helmand province was my understanding of where that was, undertaken as part of the culture, but it's a horrendous part of the culture that should have been stamped out. And it's certainly no green light to those who want children, and it would have seemed like a green light. And I find that very worrying, that in the midst of war, the children are very, very vulnerable. There are a lot of externalities that come out of this, such as the heroin poppies that are grown in order to fund the weapons. So again, going back to the military-industrial complex and all the companies involved in this who are fanning the flames of drug trade, and the various intelligence communities involved in this. I just need to sit with it for a moment because I found it very distressing when I was reading about it. It's not in this particular document, but I've read it in other documents. It's well documented now as the truth is coming out. So I want to sit with the drug trade for a moment. I feel tears. The addiction to the drugs, and of course the neglect of families when they get addicted. They're already in the poorest country in the world. I'm talking Afghanistan now, not Iraq. Although Iraq would have the same issues. It completely destroys the social fabric. So why? Greed is the reason why the drug trade is happening, in order to fund the weapons, and it's like money laundering. It's not traceable. That's why they do it. But the externality to that is the people who get hooked on the heroin and the desperation that comes from that addiction, and no education. Yeah, see, I can feel terrible pain. Oh my God, the pain. They would have got onto the drugs because they're in pain too. They were trying to suppress the pain because the heroin makes them feel good. That's why heroin did so well in the world, because a lot of pain in the people, and they're exploited. That's the exploitation through the drug dealers and the cultivators. And they make billions. It's not an honourable way to make money. So you end up with the status and you end up with the cars and all the trappings of wealth, but you lose your soul. You're addicted to the money. So that's the mirror, the drug-addicted person and the money-addicted, the greed in the other party. One party is, no, they're both trying to feel good. Both trying to feel good. One's trying to feel good through material success, and they don't feel good. See, I'm feeling pain around them as well. Deep down, it's not even deep down, they know what they're doing. And they become hard and ruthless. They have to, like the soldier. They're very much like the soldier mentality within the drug cartels. It's the same mentality. Kill or be killed. They're in a war. They're in a war. And they've come also from poverty, interestingly enough. See, I'm finding myself in Mexico, and see, Laos comes to mind. So wherever war has gone, there's been the drug trade. It's very much part of it, and prostitution is also part of it. These are all very dark, dark aspects that the murdering of people creates. The act of taking a life is a very dark thing. There's nothing joyful in this. This is what lowers our vibration. It brings up a lot of negativity, a lot of hatred. It brings out the dark side. So this whole industry is promoting the dark side. It's funny, the force, isn't that interesting? It comes up in my mind, Star Wars. And there is a Star Wars as well. So I'm going to go to that because that's coming into my mind, Star Wars. Space-based weapon systems. Reagan was the one announcing that. They wanted to shoot weapons from space. They still do. And they can. They can target through satellites, another form of targeting. Well, everything's targeting via satellite. The phones are being tracked. So Star Wars. Everything on the earth becomes a target. Anything that opposes that dark side. Isn't it funny? I'm seeing the actual Star Wars series as well in my mind. And the planet, the Dark Star. Remember that? The big space station that looked like a planet where Darth Vader was. But what is interesting, and I've done this in one of my blogs actually, was when Luke Skywalker was fighting his father. His father was the Dark Lord. It's a bummer. Well, many fathers, are being educated in this type of mindset, which is to be a man is to be violent, or to be a man is to overpower or be seen to be of status, have power. It's about power projection, power over. So going back to Luke fighting Darth Vader, when he lost his hand in the fight, the laser fight, and then he saw it become black. Another hand was there which was black. So when he became angry, and okay, this is why Star Wars is coming to me, because there's wisdom there. What the audience was being taught through George Lucas was, because he was advised not to get angry, because if he gets angry, he takes in that anger of the father. He's to try and fight him but not get angry, and of course that would be impossible for most soldiers, I would think. So he's fighting in a way that's defending. Okay, I'm starting to find myself laterally going into martial arts. And in fact, martial arts should be the replacement for all war. In other words, you can have your combat, but you do it in a way that's honourable. And typically, Aikido is the word that's coming to me, Aikido, which is a peace type of martial art, which is all about, sort of flowing with the conflict, using their anger against them in a way, but you're not fighting, you're not resisting. The key messages, and this is what you resist persists, what you look at disappears. So as you are taking on the other party, you're using their energy against them. There's techniques to minimize the energy you use, but you're able to use the energy against them, their own energy against them. But you have very strong moral codes around all of that. You would never kick someone when they're down, for example. You would honour the other as an equal party. There's no hatred. It's about tactics. It's about skill. It's about mastery in that contest. What's gone terribly wrong in our world is the acceptance of the violence and the destruction of human life, which spiritually is very toxic for people. Spiritually, there's a really big problem. You're not, universally speaking, no one is to take another's life. That's a universal law. You're not to take another's life. People's lives are meant to end naturally, not be taken. But we're at a low level. What I mean by that is we're not very evolved. We're still fighting one another, projecting power. So going back to Luke Skywalker and the hand becomes dark. Now, what that translates into from a psychological perspective is when you fight unconsciousness, that unconsciousness absorbs into you. And this is a fact. This is not a nice fanciful way of saying something. So, for example, what I would say to activists is don't fight a government and call them various names and get self-righteous on a high horse, holier than thou, at the other, they're wrong, you're right. You actually take on the unconsciousness of the other party. It seeps into you and you become the very thing you fight against. It's very important you understand that. You become the very thing you fight against. So if you're fighting against terrorism, guess what? You become it. People will say, well, how? Explain that to me. As you become self-righteous, as you become really angry, as you become in the space of the bully, if you like, and that what you do to that other is justified on some level. You're defending this, you're doing that, and they deserve what they get. They are ruthless, they are violent, they are etc., and you are also using the violence against them. But the unconsciousness is where we're not conscious of ourselves, and what we are seeing in the other is in ourselves, but we can't see it because we're not conscious. We're literally mirroring the other party. And the way life works is that as you put it out, it comes back to you. Whether you're conscious of it or not, you are the creator of your reality. You see a world full of terrorists, well, you're going to create a world full of terrorists, not a doubt about it. Your own terror is what's formulating the terror that you see. It's an aspect of you because you see it. The way for me to explain that more clearly is everything we see in our world is coming from us. So if I sit in judgment of another, that judgment's coming from within me. Now, it may well have been fed to me through media. My anger might have been whipped up by the commentaries of others. But nonetheless, inside of me, I'm believing the thoughts that have been put to me as true. And in my anger, I project it onto the other party, and that's how we smear. So those involved in psychological operations would know how to manipulate, use language, know how to create stories in order to undermine, weaken the other party, because they want their defeat. We're in a win-lose scenario. We're not in a win-win. We're not in a problem-solving paradigm where we work it out what the problem is and we overcome it and we come together as two parties, generate options and then solutions, and we end up with a wise agreement, which would be completely non-violent. When I look into Susan's transcript in the next video, she talks about that the fact that peace was most definitely possible, but it was not on the agenda. That there were warnings, but it was not on the agenda. So that unconsciousness that's being fought, and often righteousness brings about this righteous war. They call it in peace studies a just war theory, where you're fighting the good cause. And of course, you have to be able to create stories around that in order to get others to do heinous crimes, really. You have to be able to manage their perceptions, their minds, in order to get them to do what you want. This is the strategist behind. These are the ones at the high levels who are strategizing these conflicts, looking for the best advantage and linking it to economic interests and saying that's the national interest, and that's where the problem is. When we're dealing with big multinational companies who straddle the world in respect of trade, when we find ourselves in a global situation of contracting global markets where there's more competition and more desperation to get income in order to maintain the lifestyle. Because if the lifestyle is lost, they can't see any other future that they would want. They want to maintain an abundant lifestyle. They want to have all their things and gadgets, believing that's the real world. And yet, interestingly enough, if they would stand in the shoes of those others who are often poor in poor countries, they have a far richer form of culture, a far richer sense of community. They have really strong, loving bonds with one another that we can't even imagine in the West. We became more selfish as we became this independent person, struggling, self-reliant, working hard, gaining material things, but we lost our families, we lost our relatives, we lost our sense of place, we lost our sense of who we are, we lost our sense of really happy community. Most people are really existing in quite negative spaces, and there's often little conflicts that are coming and going all the time, or people are being bombarded with negative images from the television, and they're feeling there's a real sadness in the people. And I just want to say before I finish this video that I will never ever forget, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, when a car backfired in the United States just recently, and I saw all the people running, and my heart went out to the people because they were terrorized by their own media. Where did they get the idea that a backfiring car is a gun? Just constant bombardment. And of course, there are those over and above all the players I've talked about in this video who play both sides off the other and have their own agenda and dispassionately look upon these scenarios with pathological indifference to the suffering on the ground, because they, like others, have objectified the humans is what I'm saying, but I'm really saying communities. I'm saying they've dehumanized the masses, seeing them as fodder. And for those engaged in all of this, who are participants in all of this, I would say that everybody is exploited in all of this. Now I'm just going to sit quietly for a moment before I go to the next video, because I felt to connect the humanity to the targeted weapon and those involved in its production and delivery, communications, intelligence, the soldiers themselves, the aircraft designers, the petrochemical companies, the multinationals that supply them on one or so level. So I'm seeing a lot of organisations involved in even this one act. It's funny, isn't it? The age-old dark against light comes up. And going back to Star Wars, we're dealing with Empire, the galactic, what do they call themselves? Skywalkers, some sort of galactic group, weren't they? All different shapes and sizes. Star Wars. Okay, the image I'm getting is Luke when he's coming. He and a few of his squadron are coming for the run to run into the Death Star. It's the Death Star. And he's got his targeting apparatus in front. Remember, he pulls it down? He's got his... And Obi-Wan Kenobi had passed on at that time. I think Yoda was still around, I think he was. Yes, Obi-Wan had passed on, yes. So he's in his fighter jet. And he's really the last chance. He's the last Jedi. And he's going in to that very narrow chamber on the surface of the Death Star. He starts to bring down the tracking gear so that he can target the missile to go down the chute, to go into the center of the Death Star and blow it up. And then he hears Obi-Wan's voice, "Trust the Force, Luke. Trust your feelings." So he then pulls away the technology and he tunes into the Force. Now, this Force is real, and Jedi is real too. The Jedi is real, but it was just put into a film that was fictitious. But the wisdom in the film was true. And what the trusting of the feelings is going into harmony with the greater power. In other words, it's surrendering. It's what I call, I'm going to show you an image, what I call resting into Buddha. I'm not Buddhist, but I probably live some of the Buddhist ways. See the Buddha there? He's happy there, resting. It's a Buddha-like consciousness or a Christ consciousness. It's the same thing. Or a Muhammad. I'm thinking to bring them all into this, the masters and the teachers that have been around a long time. So he's resting in the trust. He's feeling for the right moment in order to shoot the weapon. So he's not needing mathematical precision. He's not needing to rely on the technology to win. He's putting all his trust into that higher power, that he will be guided. He is the guide. He is being guided. So he releases the missile and he just shoots up as fast as he can, because he's going to blow up a whole Death Star. And it did. The bomb went right down to the centre, triggered a chain reaction, and the Death Star blew up. That's how you destroyed the Empire. So the question was it the bomb that destroyed the Empire, or was it Luke learning to surrender from control? Because the Empire symbolises control. Letting go of control and trusting the higher aspect of his nature, or that higher power, to guide him. Meaning it's all-knowing, isn't it? It's all-knowing. If you're able to tune in and release that bomb at the right time. Now, the film's not advocating violence, but obviously in this particular case, this destruction had to happen in order to save many civilizations in this case. So therefore, he was fighting to save life. He wasn't fighting to destroy life. Now, for all those soldiers that end up fighting to destroy life, they're the ones who were suffering intense trauma. PTSD came up. Those who are engaged in conflict and it's got an honourable base, they're defending their country, they're defending their families. They're coming together in order to push out something that is attacking them. That's a whole different scenario. So for those who are engaged in aggressive wars in order to further economic interests, there is no honour in that. There is no principle to defend here. This is simply about making money, and it falls apart. In fact, it's inevitable that that empire will fall, because what holds things together is love, values, dignity, principle, integrity, saving lives. The founding fathers of the United States, I think, were very wise people, and there's been wise people in all countries, but I focus there because they are they're the main power, and they've been a significant perpetrator as well. The founding fathers of life, liberty, and happiness. Those words were not said for no reason, and it wasn't just about the United States' life, liberty, and happiness. There was offered to those in positions of power at that time to take the noble path, to become beacons. That's why the Statue of Liberty was brought from France to the United States, New York Harbour. It's no mistake that that statue came to New York as a beacon for liberty, and it was a female, because the females are usually blinded. They're usually used in justice too. We females are often the embodiment of justice, because we seek to be fair. Embodiment of non-violence. The light is illumination, it's enlightenment. This was the offer put to that country to guide the world in a way that enhanced true freedoms. These freedoms are not just bandied around like words in order to associate it with prosperity. That's not freedom. Prosperity is not freedom. Freedom is, it is not my place to tell you what to do. It's not my place to force you to do what I think you should do. Freedom is, I respect that you have the right to say what you need to say. There's Voltaire, and there was Beatrice. She was the author of the statement, I may not like what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. In other words, I may disagree with you, but you have the right to say it. And this is what creates a civilised society where we don't just force people onto our side to believe what we believe. That's a form of fundamentalism, is when we become very rigid. My way or the highway. You are the enemy. You're either with us or against us. No, you are different from us. Now, when I feel that you are my enemy, what is it within me that's afraid of you? If I want to destroy you, why is that aspect of myself? Why do I want to destroy that aspect of myself? Because I'm thinking holistically here. Always what we fear is something unhealed within us projected out. Fear is false evidence appearing real. It just seems that way, or it's been orchestrated to look a certain way. Fearlessness means there's nothing to fear, therefore there's no threat. Fearlessness means there's no fear. Fearlessness. There's no fear. Therefore, no one can be a threat. How do you get to a state of fearlessness? Wisdom brings you to a state of fearlessness to see that whatever is in my world is of my own creation because I'm projecting my beliefs, my values, my fear onto the world like a projector and believing that it's true what I see. And I'll give you an example of how that's true. Let's say you meet someone for the first time, very friendly, shake their hand, they seem like a nice person, you get on really well with them, you don't have their backstory, you know nothing about them. But in the first meeting, it's fine, you don't feel threatened, it's all great. And then someone comes up to you like a snake in the grass and they whisper in your ear and they say, don't trust him. He looks friendly, I know, but he's not. He's been talking to XYZ behind your back. He's after your money. He wants in on the business. He is collaborating with our enemy. Don't trust him. Now, the minute that person says that in your ear and you look at that person, they get smeared. And that's how manipulation changes everything. So I would encourage you to have a look at the work of Byron Katie. That's thework.com. The only way you'll be able to look upon the world without a story is when you start to question your own. It is to trust life. Life is working for you, not against you. Everyone comes at your beckoning on some level. What you think about, you bring about. You see as you are, not as they are. So the mind always distorts reality given the emotional and psychological and belief systems we've programmed in and projected out. That is how we don't always see things as they are. We're not seeing with clarity. So the man who held the camera, if there'd been no story of a gun, there would have been no threat. He would be alive today. The people who heard the car backfiring and all started running, if they had not had the story of a shooter, they would have just thought a car backfired. That's how we program in fear, we create the threat, panic arises, and then violence occurs. There's a lot to be answered for in respect of the movie industry creating such fear in the public. Now, these fears are all manifesting into more fears. Now, for those who are engaged, and I'll just very briefly say this and then I'll finish, who are engaged in the manufacture of these technologies, these violent technologies, it is a zero-sum game. What you put out comes back. You create an escalation in the conflict, it comes back to you. I suggest you sit very still on whether this is what you really want to do. So I'm going to leave it there and then I'll come back to Susan in the next one. I felt very strongly. It's funny, I just have to go with the flow. I don't always get things done as I planned because I have to trust the inner feeling, and that I'm very much in alignment with allowing the force to move us. And as you can see with the sort of videos that I'm doing, I never know where they go. I just go with the flow. So I send you great love and great peace. I send it to the intelligence community. I send it to the industrial military complex, or Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, Raytheon, and all those engaged in manufacture of weapons. I send you love. The words, they know not what they do, comes to my mind. And I say again with love and respect, it's not all, I mean, it may well be all about money for you, but I don't know if it is. Oh, there's good people everywhere. I send love to the Republican Party, that comes to mind, and the Democrats, and the Chinese Communists because of the conflict that's coming up now with the trade war. To my own government, I send love and peace. Especially sending intense love to the Israelis because I know the games they're playing as well in all of this. I just want to sit with them for a moment as I send love. The word Jericho, I'll have to look it up what it means. Jericho, Temple Mount, Sermon on the Mount. Love each other. Make peace with the Palestinians. Stop propagandizing. Can we stop the spin and just make peace? Because what you do for another will return to the self. All the things you think you fear, you're creating. If you truly want the abundance, make peace with your cousins. I'm sending love to all the peoples in Afghanistan, Iraq. Sudan comes up, and Syria, Somalia. And wherever wars are on the planet, where people are feeling terrorized. I'm also sending love to those who passed over from these conflicts, because people live on. Sending love to all those who are saving the lives of people, the medical people, those in the backgrounds that aren't seen, who are the voices for peace, who are the ones who seek to de-escalate the violence, who are working very hard to create a better world in the Alliance, Truth Alliance. Sending love to the whistleblowers who are allowing the public to have an insight into things done in their name, which is absolutely appropriate given the monies coming from taxes. Certainly on that level, but also from our common humanity, we need to know what's done, particularly when we become targets. And to become more connected to those who become targets, who are innocent in these situations. So sending love to all the families as well. And to Mother Nature, who has to bear the pain of all these munitions and toxins. So be it. Until the next video. Bye.